Welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about The Harvest, written by Dan Abnett. There's a lot of things to talk about the behind the scenes of this story. Let's not try not to waste so much time. Probably important for this marathon, at least stories that we've already tackled, is that this is actually the start of a trilogy revolving around the invasion of Earth by the Cybermen in roughly modern times. The story you've tackled before is The Reaping, a sixth Doctor adventure, which, despite take place in chronologically first, came out in release order after. And there's another story called The Gathering with the fifth Doctor, but I don't have that one, so we didn't tackle it. I don't see any connections between any of these stories other than the fact that they're Cybermen. In fact, the idea that there's Cybermen in this story is actually a massive spoiler. But this is a story that came out way years ago in 2004. So if you didn't know that by now, then sorry. This story also introduces a new companion for the Seventh Doctor, as we get introduced to Hex, played by Philip Oliver. At least I think his name is Philip Oliver. Philip Oliver. This a character which we obviously get introduced. I'll talk more about him during the story segment. Now, this is where we need to talk about the chronological ordering of Doctor Who for a moment, because specifically two main elements to do with this story, which I'm going to tackle this in a much different way compared to most people. The first off is to do with the Hex character himself. Now, for those of you who don't know, in terms of Big Finish Productions, this is, from what I can gather, this is actually the first time I've listened to this story, and it is actually going to be the first time I listen to any of these stories featuring Hex as a companion. But I've done my research, and from what I can gather, the Hex era as the companion is very heavy on the story arcs, meaning that stories interconnected and things become important in later or earlier stories. And there are a few stories which are considered vital to understanding his story arc. Sadly, I couldn't get most of these stories. I've only got a handful of Hex stories at my disposal at the moment. So, my discussions, my topic on these videos are going to be from my personal experience. But I will admit, trying to get into the Hex stuff, I was really hesitant on getting into the Hex stuff because of this issue. I'm personally, personally for me, if you asked me across the street, I am not a huge fan of these story arcs, the heavy reliant on story arcing, if that makes sense. Like, from what I can gather, this one is fine because this is his first story. Although we do get hints of the something mysterious and something will be important later on in the timeline. In later stories, things are going to become much more important, and you're going to be a bit lost if you don't keep up with every story. Now, knowing how expensive Big Finish is as well, it really just doesn't interest me. I don't like, not to say that they are inherently bad. If you like these kind of stories, all power for you. In fact, in the modern world that we live in, these story arc heavy storylines are all over the place and incredibly popular. So you've already won the battle in terms of the mainstream's opinion of story arcing. But personally, I just don't like these kind of stuff, and I don't understand what is the newest idea that you just can't have a single story and you just enjoy a single story for what it is. But yeah, that's a really annoying aspect to the hex stuff. So in later stories, I might be confused, I might miss some details, I might incorrectly count something as a plot hole or a thing when in fact it is explained in a different audio drama. But yeah, that's just my personal experience. Now the second one, which is the second thing we need to talk about in canon, is the relationship between the Doctor and Ace. Basically, to spoil into the video, Ace doesn't go by Ace anymore. She goes by her last name, which I believe is McShane. Now this is actually explained in the New Adventures novels, which were released just after the classic series ended back in 1989. And basically what happened is that the Doctor travelled with Ace for a while, then she left for a small period whilst the Doctor took on a new companion, and a few novels down the line, Ace actually returned with a much more adult personality and has actually disowned the nickname of Ace, despite the Doctor still using it. And technically that means that this story takes place all of these hex stories take place much later on, as I will be tackling, technically I'll be tackling one of the New Adventures stories, but I put it later on. And the reason I've done this is because my personal headcanon, like I said, Doctor Who doesn't have any real official canon, but in my head, what I like to connect these stories by is I like the stories like with companions having like eras, and I'm personally not a fan of companions going and then coming back, having like a brand new era, just like with a gap in between, if that makes any sense. So in my own headcanon, I've kind of bundled up all of Ace's stories that can connect to one another and put some of the later ones back into the earlier adventures in my headcanon. So despite we're going to be talking about a story which technically takes place earlier in this, being taken place after for me, it doesn't really bother me. And Ace in this story, it does actually act more like a TV counterpart compared to her New Adventure novel counterpart. It's just the fact that she's going by McShane in this story rather than Ace, despite the fact that the Doctor is calling her Ace. So yeah, that's a lot of background information. So let's actually talk about the story itself. We start to get introduced to Hex, a doctor at an A&E nurse doctor person, I guess, who is actually, it's on his birthday, and he is shocked to find that one of his friends has actually had a injury, he's had a crash, and he's been taken to the hospital. Hex is a newbie, he hasn't seen any of his friends being severely injured before, so this kind of gives him a nasty little shock. And it's here that he's been talking to one of these people who work at the hospital, and he's saying that I've seen you taking an eye on one of the girls, and I've asked her to come to your birthday party later today. But Hex isn't kind of like in the mood at the moment because he's worried about his friend and stuff. And it turns out the woman that this character is actually talking about is Ace herself. Now this is something, story detail, I really love about this adventure. The first episode doesn't feature the Doctor necessarily. This first episode feels like a Ace spin-off, as she is investigating the hospital and noticing weird and odd shenanigans. So yeah, and seeing Ace in such a prominent role. Ace is probably one of the most fascinating, one of the most three-dimensional characters of all the companions of Doctor Who. Not to say that she is the best per se, though a lot of people do consider her their favourite companions for very good reason. Personally, my favourite is Leela. But Ace is up there as one of the best companions, and it's easy to see why. Sophie Aldred works off incredibly well with Philip Oliver. And basically Oliver becomes Ace's companion. That's a really bad mix-up. Hex is basically, in a way, some have put this, I've heard a lot of people say this. Actually, this is a story I'm saying, it's not as detailed as most people talk about, but Hex is essentially to Ace as Ace is to the Doctor, in that they're close friends. They become friendly and charitable, and Ace kind of nurtures Hex into becoming a much more stronger, tougher character. But in a way, Hex is just a pawn for her. Despite Ace basically befriending Hex and encouraging him to investigate in a way, to look into the deeper, darker elements of the hospital. Ace is basically using him to try and get some information about some mysterious going on at the hospital, with some mysterious bodies disappearing. We later hear throughout the story these two doctors which appear apparently in an underground bunker. They've been examining on these creatures, these half-human sentient beings who apparently are seemingly very new to emotions. They seem to be learning emotions as they trying to understand fear, happiness, joy, horror, anxieties, and it's a very strange relationship to technically the villains, as we basically learn that there's something sinister going on with these patients. Patient 1 seems to be perfectly fine, but one of the patients, I believe they said is patient 6, has suffered from some sort of cardio arrest. They didn't actually say cardio arrest, but is suffering from something and they need a donor quick. So they actually kidnap Hex's friend's body and transplant his organs for this creature to keep us alive. But they've told Hex that he's sadly passed away in this horrifying cadaver. So X is basically not in the mood for his own birthday. I just remembered two things I need to talk about. One, this story is set in 2021. Yes, this year. That's really bizarre, isn't it? Yeah. And second of all, which I forgot last video as well, which is really, really bad. This is the official Big Finish CD cover, as you can see. My one actually has a misprint where the logo is kind of like appearing twice, one like ghosted over each other. And like always, I printed my own DVD cover, which I actually got from DeviantArt. So that's the spine, if anyone is interested. And that's the back. There you go. Sorry about that. I don't know why this keeps happening. I keep forgetting to do the cover reveals. But anyway. So yeah, we basically get to learn a lot about Hex and his personality. And it's basically him being introduced to Ace and her adventures. Later on, after the party, Hex actually offers to give Ace a ride home, where suddenly they are chased by a really tall man who can run extraordinarily fast. And that is just kind of like a really weird scene. I don't know what I feel about it. I found that scene just really seems really odd. But there's a great scene afterwards where they're talking about it and Ace is like, please just forget about it. If you want to stay safe, just forget about me, forget about anything. I'm not going to come to work tomorrow. In fact, I'm not going to come to work ever again. I think I've done what I need to do. So I'll see you around hopefully, but it seems like this is goodbye for now. And she actually leaves in a car park, which was used to be a junkyard in Totter's Lane. Yeah, the Doctor's back in Totter's Lane. But Hex kind of gets anxious as something, he doesn't feel quite right, and so he follows Ace to the car park and only finding what he calls a portaloo in there, and he's like, what are you knocking on the door? What are you doing? And the cliffhanger for part 1 is actually Ace letting him into the TARDIS as the Doctor introduces himself. Hello, I'm the Doctor, and welcome to the TARDIS. And that's our cliffhanger. Basically him getting introduced to the Doctor, which is a very strange cliffhanger. There's no grip in the sense that there's no danger, there's no fear. It's literally Hex getting introduced to the TARDIS and the Doctor kind of being introduced to elements which are familiar to the fan base. But I think it really works. I really love this cliffhanger. The rest of the story then basically has them trying to break into the hospital again, not before the Doctor tries to explain about the TARDIS, why he's there, trying to explain like the dynamics. Hex has a very modern or very early reaction to the TARDIS, in which he just cannot fathom the fact that it's bigger on the inside and out, and it kind of freaks him out, and he's kind of panicking, he kind of gets a bit angry about it, and he's like, wait, what's going on? I don't understand. You're like, he's getting a bit petrified, which really does work as like introducing Hex, and he's basically your average Joe. He's the everyman. He's the guy who isn't used to having such weird and bizarre adventures happening so much around him. He's not like Ace, who is brash-headed. He's not like the Doctor, this manipulative chess master. He is just an average, normal guy who just gets caught up in all this mess. One thing about this story that I'm not quite sure how to feel is the 7th Doctor during this scene. The Doctor's a bit of an asshole. He kind of like treats Hex like a thing in a way. Like when Hex is being reasonably freaking out, the Doctor's like, if I tell you anything, well, are you going to have another freak out moment, another of your Fabergasts, one of your oh my god moments? And yes, sometimes that has worked semi in a way before with the 6th Doctor with H.G. Wells, but here I don't think it really clicks. I understand that this is the 7th Doctor, who's supposed to be much more darker and dangerous. Maybe it plays into the more of the new adventures or some audio dramas that I haven't listened to. But the Doctor seems really out of character in this moment. He seems really quick to judge Hex for not understanding the felicity of extraterrestrial and Time Lord science, and is really quick to brush him as just an inconvenience, as someone who'd get in the way. But Ace is actually the one to correct the Doctor. Like, he could be very valuable to us. If he wants to help, let him help, Doctor. Come on, please. And I just don't know how to feel about the Doctor. He does soften up throughout the story, but this initial scene with him in the TARDIS, I don't know. I think it's less about him being pedantic and treating Hex like he's like an inconvenience. I mean, the Doctor has done this before, like I mentioned with H.G. Wells. He's done it with Joe Grant. He's done it with Ian and Barbara. But in those sense, they kind of proven in a way that they can be a little bit an inconvenience, and they've got to then in the story prove to themselves. But here, Hex literally just walks into the TARDIS, has a little bit of a freak out before the Doctor judges him and is like, he's clearly going to get in the way. I don't know, something about that really doesn't click with me, personally. So, the plan is to go back into the hospital where Hex, being friendly with most of the hospital staff, is going to try and infiltrate the lower levels to try and figure out what's going on. As the Doctor will go into one of the offices and trying to sneak in some codes to try and break in. He's been doing this for a while and being set in the future, or at least set in the future when this was released in 2004. He's been talking to an artificial computer. I guess in a way it predates Alexa. It could be like a precursor to Alexa. That'd be very interesting, wouldn't it? If it was the Doctor was talking to Alexa to try and break into the computer system. And Ace and Hex actually convinced this guy to give them secret codes so they can go down to the basement, but this guy has to come down with them to investigate some parts which are off limits to the public. Ace pretends that she is actually part of the human resource department and states that that there could be a mix-up and somebody's been using this person's identity as a fraud. This is obviously a lie to try and gain his confidence. So they go underneath to try and figure out what's going on until suddenly the doors open and reveals the true threat of this demeanour. The Ace originally thinks that it's the Doctor that opens the door, but the Doctor reports on a communication system that it wasn't him. He was halfway through trying to break the code before the door started opening. And it's revealed that there's Cybermen. Yeah, this is the reveal of Cybermen. And that's the cliffhanger for part 2, which really starts hooking with its audience. That is a very great cliffhanger. It's a shame that the Cybermen take only real appearance takes place in parts 3 and 4, meaning only really half the story is about them, but their presence is felt throughout the story as we have this hospital-themed adventure, and we basically learn that these creatures, which these two doctors in the basement have been studying, are basically proto-Cybermen, which the Doctor believes the humans are actually trying to make themselves into Cybermen, trying to convert Cybermen so they can become better astronauts, because Cybermen don't need oxygen, they don't need fuel, they can stay in space for long distances without going completely mad. And basically the Doctor theorizes that these two humans are trying to basically push human evolution further by trying to muddle with Cybermen technologies. And Ace actually gets captured, whilst Hex then teams up with the Doctor to basically try to find out a plan to try and get back into the base and try to save Ace. And I think that's what makes this story really work, is that in each story there's a different dynamic between each of our characters. In the first story, the Doctor's not even in it, as Ace and Hex befriend one another. In episode 2, the Doctor then gets involved and basically is watching the action and communicating to them through a mic to try and basically get them to figure out the information which he needs. And episode 3 has the lack of Ace, allowing the Doctor to get properly introduced to Hex and stuff. And this is where he softens up to Hex and is much more viable. We still get some scenes where the Doctor's a bit romantic to Hex, but they feel a lot more natural here. For example, when Hex is trying to ask the Doctor about the origins of the Cybermen, and the Doctor's like, if I tell you, would you not freak out? And Hex is like, after the TARDIS, after the Cybermen, I'm pretty sure I can handle it. And the Doctor then explains that Earth had a twin planet that went off its orbit, to which Hex is like, oh my god, that's terrible. I forgot to mention as well, he's got like a Northern English accent to try and be a counterpart to Ace's Southern English accent. So yeah, there's this whole dynamic between the North and the South with Ace and Hex. And the Doctor's basically trying to figure out what's going on, and he theorizes, he comes up with his own conclusions, and that this process must be stopped. And so they try and break in to the hospital. And one of the cliffhangers is basically all these characters just screaming and shouting at each other. I think the cliffhanger for part 3 is incredibly weak. After the really great cliffhangers of part 1 and part 2, cliffhanger 3 kind of feels like, right, the story, we don't actually have any plans for a cliffhanger here, so let's just cut it there and hope that the audience doesn't notice that the cliffhanger is a bit anticlimactic in terms of it gripping its audience for the next episode. It just seems like a bunch of characters screaming. It's like, no, no, like a usual action scene, or at least in my opinion, anyway. But the Doctor tries to talk to this proto-Cyberman, and he examines everything, and he discovers that something doesn't feel quite right. It's like, instead of people turning into Cybermen, it's more like Cybermen being augmented to have human flesh and skin. It's very strange. And Hex finds something that really disturbs him, that really freaks him out, which shows the much more darker attitude of the 7th Doctor era. Hex finds the remains of his friend, who he believed was dead, now being scattered as a cadaver to become organ parts for the Cybermen. And the Doctor basically tries to stop all this with the doctors and stuff. Hex reunites with Ace and actually rescues her to try and get out, whilst Ace is like, right, we've met the Cybermen before, we know that they are the most dangerous, fearful creatures in existence, and they've got to be stopped. So, come on, Hex, we've got to stop them. But the Doctor actually trying to communicate with the humans, and originally gives off this massive great speech about how humans meddle things with things they don't understand, and you try and progress, but you're just giving away your humanity. And then a twist arrives. This is kind of a spoiler in a way. It turns out that the humans actually found a group of Cybermen who didn't want to be Cybermen anymore. They want to, they've actually made a deal with humanity to give them some highly advanced technology from Mondas in return for them to actually deprogram them, to de-Cybermen them, and hopefully turn them back into humans. And the Doctor originally is like, this is insane, this is madness. But then is kind of is in disbelief. He's just like, but you can't. I don't even know if the process is physically reversible. I don't think it's even possible. But he does actually try and help them to try and soften the blow, where in a twist it's revealed that this was a plan all along for the Cybermen to become much more advanced and much more deadly. They've had so many defeats and they are very weak that patient zero, which actually turned out to be a cyber leader, actually came up with this plan so that they could try and understand humans better, to try and augmentate them into becoming better killing machines and better understanding in how humans' emotions work. That's a very interesting dilemma. I personally like to think, this is my headcanon after first listening to this, this is the origins of the 80s Cybermen, where the Cybermen would use much more emotional terminology like excellent. We never hear anybody say excellent in this story, which I think was a bit of a missed opportunity. But the idea of the Cybermen going, right, we're not only just going to be emotionless creatures which have devoured all of our emotions, but we're going to try and understand emotions, to try and use emotions to better understand our enemies so we can manipulate them in a way where the cyber leader would quickly gain a doctor's companion to use as a prisoner so that he can easily manipulate the doctor. That is, in my opinion, what's happening here. This is what my headcanon. Obviously, this isn't on any official information, but I really like the idea that this would be the origins of those particular Cybermen. I think that would be really, really cool. And so the doctor is basically shocked. He's like, how dare you? How could you? I thought there was hope. I thought that there was a chance. But no, you were just evil for the sakes of evil at this point. And you've twisted my arm. You tried to manipulate me. And you almost succeeded. To which Ace and Hex in the background have actually started smashing things up, which would stop the Cybermen from basically sustaining their existence. And another scene which actually is a reference to the more darker personality of the Seventh Doctor. The cyber leader starts freaking out and understands the concept of fear. He is starting to suffer from fear as he begs for the Doctor to help, to stop this pain, to stop this suffering, please don't let me die. And the Seventh Doctor is just like, you put yourself into this, you have no one to blame but yourself. And leaves him in the hospital basement to die. I really like this ending. That is a really cool ending. The story ends initially with Doctor and Ace telling the Hex, right, we better go before there's any awkward questions about our involvement. So, bye-bye, Hex. And Hex is like, is everyone okay? Okay, good. I'm going to go for a sec. And he goes to Ace and actually is like, can I please travel with you? Can I please go with you? And the Doctor initially is like, please don't ask me that. But Ace is like, Doctor, it's his choice. If he wants to travel with us, then he can. To which the Hex says, oh, thank you very much, you're not going to regret this. And so, the Hex joins the TARDIS team, and we start our adventures with a three TARDIS crew, with the Doctor, Ace, and now Hex. And that's The Harvest. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this. There's some really great moments, specifically between Ace, Hex, and there's some great details about the Cybermen and their twisted nature. It has everything what I love about the Cybermen. The idea that they are emotionless creatures who were once creatures of feeling and stuff, and they use that to manipulate people, to try and torture them. And in a way, they can actually kind of prove that they're right by the actions they have in the story. Something which I praise the Cyber Leader for in the story Earthshock. So I'm really glad that this story does the Cybermen a lot of justice. This story, I think, was so much better than I initially thought. I was expecting to have a lot of scenes where it's like from what my information has gathered. Maybe there's more stories to come that are like this, but I'm so glad that the first story isn't like this. There are certain scenes which tease up for later stories. The Doctor is actually looking at some details about Hex's data, and he learns something about his parentage, his family, which would become a detail for a later story, which I won't give away here because I don't know if it's important for stories that we're going to tackle. But there's no so much of it which becomes very distracting to the story. And yeah, but the thing about the Doctor being a kind of a dick at the start did kind of put me off a little bit. And the story really kind of needs to get going. There's a lot of build-up before we get into the main action piece with the Cybermen and their stuff. When the Cybermen do come into it in part 3 and 4, brilliant, perfectly written, perfectly acted, perfectly executed, just spot on. But yeah, it's half of the story, essentially, to building up to that moment. So yeah, overall, really great story, really enjoyed it. So there you go, that's The Harvest. So join me next time, where we will be tackling not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 stories in a Doctor Who anthology audio drama. So join me next time for 45, and I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!